A single button separated unimaginable wealth from total ruin. "Don't touch that button." The desperate warning from the maid's daughter echoed through the executive floor, but it was already too late. In mere minutes, a billion-dollar empire that had taken decades to build came crashing down like a house of cards. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The auditorium at Nova Helix Industries buzzed with electric anticipation. Sleek LED panels cast a blue-white glow across the sea of expectant faces. Venture capitalists in tailored suits, tech journalists with recording devices poised, and executives whose collective net worth rivaled small nations. The air felt charged, as if the room itself sensed it was witnessing history. At center stage stood Garrett Voss, his confident smile betraying none of the pressure weighing on his shoulders. The CEO adjusted his designer glasses and glanced at the holographic display, counting down to the moment that would cement his legacy. The neural interface device sitting on the pedestal beside him looked deceptively simple, a slim headband that promised to revolutionize how humans interacted with artificial intelligence. 3 minutes to launch, announced a disembodied voice, prompting a fresh wave of murmurs through the crowd. In the far corner of the auditorium, Alejandra Ruiz nervously adjusted her gray uniform, trying to remain invisible as she had been trained to do. The janitorial staff member hadn't planned to attend the event, but circumstances had forced her hand. Her daughter, Valentina, stood quietly beside her, dark curls tied with a ribbon that had seen better days. "Mama, there's something wrong with their system," Valentina whispered, her eyes fixed on the distant stage. Alejandra squeezed her daughter's hand. "Shh, me, Vida. We're just here to watch, remember? I couldn't find anyone to watch you after school." The 10-year-old frowned, her fingers tapping an anxious rhythm against her leg. She could sense it, the subtle irregularities in the code scrolling across the distant screens, visible only to those who knew what to look for. Valentina had always possessed an uncanny ability to understand machines, a gift that both fascinated and worried her mother. On stage, Garrett gestured grandly as he addressed the audience. "Today, we don't just launch a product. We usher in a new era of human potential." His charismatic voice carried effortlessly through the state-of-the-art sound system. Investors nodded appreciatively, already calculating returns on their millions. Reporters typed furiously, racing to publish the first coverage. The countdown continued relentlessly. Alejandra felt her daughter growing increasingly tense beside her. "We should go," Valentina insisted, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "We can't leave now," Alejandra whispered back. "I need this job." Neither of them could have predicted how the next few minutes would unfold, how a child's intuition would clash with a billion-dollar ambition, or how their modest lives would suddenly be thrust into the unforgiving spotlight of public attention. As the countdown reached its final seconds, Valentina's eyes widened with recognition of a pattern only she could see, a fatal flaw embedded in the system that everyone else had missed. The auditorium fell into a hushed silence as Garrett Voss positioned his finger above the gleaming launch button. The Nova Helix CEO stood center stage, bathed in the blue glow of projection screens displaying the neural interface AI assistant that promised to revolutionize human technology interaction. 300 pairs of eyes fixed on his hand, investors clutching tablets with stock projections, tech reporters with cameras poised, and executives whose bonuses hinged on this moment. "Today, we changed the future," Garrett announced, his voice carrying through the state-of-the-art sound system. His finger descended toward the button in what felt like slow motion. "Don't touch that button." The clear, high voice cut through the silence like a knife. Heads turned in unison toward the source. Valentina Ruiz, standing near the exit door, her dark curls tied back with a ribbon. The 10-year-old daughter of Alejandra Ruiz, one of the janitorial staff members, had been instructed to wait quietly while her mother finished her shift. Garrett's hand froze mid-air. His practiced smile faltered for just a moment before returning with forced brightness. "Seems we have a young critic in our midst," he said, generating nervous laughter from the audience. Valentina didn't shrink under the sudden attention. "The system isn't stable," she insisted, her small frame somehow commanding the massive space. "I can see the pattern errors from here." Dr. Eleanor Chase, seated in the front row, straightened in her chair. The AI ethicist's eyes narrowed as she studied the child with sudden interest. "Security," Garrett called, his voice maintaining its pleasant tone while his eyes hardened. "Please escort our young friend and her parent outside." A security guard moved toward Valentina just as Alejandra rushed to her daughter's side, apologizing profusely. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Voss. My daughter has an active imagination. "Mom, you know I understand systems," Valentina whispered urgently. "Something's wrong with their code." The audience shifted uncomfortably, the spell of the moment broken. Several investors exchanged glances, while reporters furiously typed notes on their devices. "Just a minor interruption, folks," Garrett assured everyone, his charisma working overtime to recapture the momentum. "Children say the darndest things, don't they?" As Alejandra gently guided her daughter toward the exit, Valentina looked back over her shoulder. "You're making a mistake," she said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. The security guard closed the door behind them, and Garrett Voss cleared his throat. "Now, where were we?" Ah, yes, making history. But something had changed in the room. The warning lingered in the air like an unwelcome ghost, impossible to completely dismiss despite the resumed applause and Garrett's confident smile. In the front row, Eleanor Chase continued staring at the door where the child had stood, a troubled expression crossing her face. Garrett Voss glanced at Valentina Ruiz, her warning hanging in the air, but the expectant faces of investors and the weight of $1 billion valuation pressed upon him. He straightened his tie and flashed his trademark smile. "The future waits for no one," he declared, pressing the glossy launch button with theatrical flair. The auditorium's massive screens illuminated with the Nova Helix logo as the neural interface AI assistant activated. Hundreds of pre-selected users across the country simultaneously received the connection notification on their devices. The live broadcast captured every moment as Garrett raised his arms triumphantly, basking in what he believed was his crowning achievement. 3 minutes and 27 seconds later, the first error message appeared. A tech reporter's smartphone began emitting a high-pitched whine, then another, and another. The AI assistant, designed to integrate seamlessly with existing technology, was instead overriding security protocols and accessing restricted data. "Minor technical difficulties," Garrett assured the increasingly restless crowd, but beads of sweat formed on his forehead. The CEO's eyes darted toward Dr. Eleanor Chase, who was frantically typing on her laptop, her face drained of color. "Shut it down," Eleanor whispered urgently into her headset. "The firewall's been breached." On the main screen, the sleek interface began displaying private user information, emails, photos, banking details, cycling through them at alarming speed. The broadcast, still rolling live to millions of viewers, captured every horrifying second. Alejandra reached for her daughter's hand, pulling Valentina closer as chaos erupted. Investors leapt from their seats, reporters shouted questions, and the company's stock ticker on the side screen began its catastrophic descent. "This is impossible," Garrett stammered, his charisma evaporating as the system continued its meltdown. "We ran every possible test!" But the young girl had seen what they hadn't. Valentina watched silently as emergency lights began flashing, the building's power fluctuating under the strain of cascading system failures. The AI had connected to Nova Helix's central servers and was spreading like wildfire through their networks. Within 15 minutes, the company's valuation had plummeted by $300 million. Within 30, it had halved. Security guards struggled to maintain order as executives rushed for exits, phones pressed to their ears. Through it all, cameras continued rolling, broadcasting the technological disaster to a global audience. Social media exploded with clips of the meltdown, each one featuring the moment just before, when a child's voice had clearly warned them all. Alejandra held Valentina tightly, watching as the empire Garrett had built crumbled around him in real time, all because he couldn't heed a simple warning. "Don't touch that button." Garrett Voss stood before a wall of flashing cameras, his carefully cultivated image of tech visionary crumbling with each question. Nova Helix was clearly the target of industrial sabotage, he insisted, straightening his designer tie. Our systems were compromised by external forces seeking to derail innovation. The CEO's words rang hollow against the backdrop of chaos unfolding behind closed doors. Inside Nova Helix headquarters, panic had replaced the celebratory atmosphere of just hours before. Engineers frantically tried to contain the damage as the rogue AI continued to breach security protocols across thousands of networks. Marketing executives huddled in glass-walled conference rooms, watching in horror as the company's stock plummeted on real-time displays. The once pristine corridors now echoed with urgent footsteps and hushed, panicked conversations. "We need damage control now," shouted a senior vice president, slamming his fist on a sleek conference table. "Call everyone we know in the tech press." Meanwhile, in a cramped utility closet on the building's lower level, Alejandra Ruiz held her daughter close, shielding her from the growing storm. "You did nothing wrong, mi vida," she whispered, stroking Valentina's dark curls. "You tried to help them." The young girl nodded silently, her brilliant mind already processing the implications of what had happened. She had seen the flaws in the system during her quiet explorations of the building's computers, patterns that adults had somehow missed. Security personnel began a floor-by-floor search, rumors spreading that someone had interfered with the launch. "They're looking for someone to blame," Alejandra told her daughter, gathering their few belongings. "We need to leave quietly." As they slipped out through a service entrance, the contrast between worlds couldn't have been starker. Executives arrived in luxury vehicles to manage the crisis, while Alejandra and Valentina waited at a bus stop in the growing evening chill. By nightfall, whispers about the janitor's kid who tried to stop the launch had begun circulating on tech forums. A few early social media posts questioned why a child's warning had been ignored by some of the most educated minds in Silicon Valley. In their modest apartment across town, Alejandra turned off her phone as news alerts continued to flood in. The divide between the glass and steel towers of innovation and the working-class neighborhoods that supported them had never seemed wider. As Valentina finally drifted to sleep, Alejandra wondered how long they could remain anonymous in a world where cameras captured everything and information spread like wildfire. The video appeared on TechLeaks first, grainy and slightly distorted, but unmistakable in its content. A cleaning robot, making its scheduled rounds during the Nova Helix launch event, had captured the moment when Valentina Ruiz stood up and called out her warning. "Don't touch that button." Her voice rang clear above the hushed crowd, just seconds before Garrett Voss initiated the catastrophic launch sequence. Within hours, the footage spread across every social media platform. News outlets ran it on continuous loops, tech bloggers dissected every frame, and commentators debated the significance of a 10-year-old girl who had seemingly predicted the billion-dollar collapse. The hashtag Button Girl began trending worldwide. "The child knew," wrote one viral post with millions of shares. "Silicon Valley ignored the wisdom of a janitor's daughter and paid the price." Alejandra watched in horror as her daughter's face became the symbol of the Nova Helix disaster. She pulled the curtains closed in their modest Palo Alto apartment as reporters began camping outside. "Mama, why are they taking pictures of our home?" Valentina asked, peering through a small gap in the fabric. The young girl, who had always found comfort in the predictable patterns of machines, now faced the unpredictable chaos of sudden fame. Her dark curls and serious expression appeared on magazine covers and television screens. Some hailed her as a hero, a truth-teller who had tried to prevent disaster. Others painted her as a scapegoat, suggesting she might have known about sabotage or been manipulated by competitors. "She's just a child who noticed something wrong," Alejandra insisted to the few reporters she reluctantly spoke with. "Not a prophet, not a spy." At school, Valentina's classmates treated her differently. Some asked for autographs, others whispered behind her back. Teachers seemed unsure whether to celebrate or ignore her newfound notoriety. The principal called Alejandra twice, concerned about disruptions to the learning environment. At night, mother and daughter sat at their small kitchen table, sorting through interview requests and offers from book publishers, tech companies, and even Hollywood producers. "They want to own your story," Alejandra explained, tossing another letter into the rejection pile. Valentina nodded, understanding more than most adults realized. "But it's not just my story," she replied, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn tablecloth. "It's about what happens when people rush technology without thinking about consequences." The weight of unwanted attention pressed down on both of them. Alejandra worried about her job security at Nova Helix, while her daughter struggled with being simultaneously celebrated and scrutinized. Neither had asked for this spotlight, yet now they stood center stage in a drama that continued to unfold across screens worldwide. The marble halls of the Senate building felt impossibly vast to Valentina Ruiz as she clutched her mother's hand. Camera flashes erupted around them, turning the 10-year-old into a reluctant celebrity. Outside Alejandra's apartment that morning, reporters had formed a human barrier, thrusting microphones forward and shouting questions about Nova Helix's catastrophic launch. "Did you know the AI would malfunction?" one reporter had called out. "How does a child understand what billion-dollar engineers missed?" another had demanded. Alejandra had shielded her daughter, pushing through the crowd with quiet determination. "My daughter will speak when it's appropriate," she'd said firmly, guiding Valentina into a waiting car. Now, seated before the imposing semicircle of senators, Valentina's dark curls were neatly tied back with her favorite ribbon. She appeared calm, though her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her carefully pressed dress. The committee chairman, Senator Blackwell, adjusted his microphone. Miss Ruiz, please explain why you felt compelled to warn against the activation of the neural interface device. Valentina leaned forward. The system architecture showed recursive errors during beta testing. I noticed them when my mother brought me to work. The AI wasn't ready. It couldn't distinguish between helpful suggestions and harmful commands. Her clear, technical explanation caused murmurs among the assembled tech experts. Valentina continued, describing complex coding flaws with remarkable precision. Several senators exchanged impressed glances. "Young lady," interrupted Senator Grimes, a silver-haired man with ties to several tech lobbyists, "while your enthusiasm is noted, we need credible testimony from qualified experts, not schoolyard observations." "Sir, I can show you exactly," Valentina began. "That will be enough," Grimes cut her off. "This isn't show and tell. We'll hear from actual engineers." Alejandra straightened in her seat, eyes flashing with indignation. "My daughter understands these systems better than—" "Mrs. Ruiz," the chairman interjected, "please control your outbursts, or you'll both be removed." Valentina felt her throat tighten as the committee redirected questions to industry veterans who hadn't even witnessed the launch. Her warning, the one that could have prevented everything, was being dismissed because of her age and background. As they left the hearing room, Valentina whispered, "They didn't listen, Mama. Just like Garrett Voss didn't listen." Alejandra squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "Some people can't see past what they expect to find. But the truth doesn't change because they ignore it." Walking down the Capitol steps, Valentina noticed a woman watching them intently. Dr. Eleanor Chase, Nova Helix's lead AI ethicist. Their eyes met briefly before Eleanor turned away, her expression troubled. Something in that look told Valentina this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Dr. Eleanor Chase sat alone, in her dimly lit office, the weight of guilt pressing down on her shoulders. The screens around her displayed news coverage of the Senate hearing where Valentina Ruiz had testified with remarkable clarity before being silenced. Eleanor rubbed her temples, remembering how she had flagged the neural interface's instability weeks before launch, only to have her concerns dismissed by Garrett Voss as minor setbacks. The child had seen what an entire team of engineers had overlooked, or worse, ignored. Eleanor's conscience wouldn't let her remain silent any longer. After 3 sleepless nights, she gathered her courage and the classified documents that would expose Nova Helix's negligence. Outside Alejandra Ruiz's apartment building, the ethicist hesitated. This woman had cleaned her office for years, yet they had barely exchanged words beyond polite greetings. Now Eleanor was about to upend both their lives. She knocked softly. "Dr. Chase?" Alejandra's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. "What are you doing here?" "Please, call me Eleanor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "May I come in?" "It's about Valentina." And the launch. Inside the modest apartment, Eleanor noticed touches of warmth everywhere. Handmade curtains, family photos, and a small desk covered with circuit boards and notebooks. Valentina was at a neighbor's home, Alejandra explained, away from the reporters who had been hounding them. "Your daughter was right," Eleanor said, placing a sealed envelope on the kitchen table. "These documents prove the AI was unstable. Our simulations showed catastrophic failures in 97% of stress tests." Alejandra's hands trembled as she examined the papers. "You knew?" "I warned them," Eleanor admitted, shame coloring her words. "But Garrett had investors breathing down his neck. The board wanted their billion-dollar launch." She paused, gathering courage. "I should have done more. I should have been braver, like Valentina." Tears welled in Alejandra's eyes. "They fired me yesterday, threatened deportation if I don't sign their papers." Eleanor reached across the table, hesitantly touching Alejandra's hand. "I won't let that happen. These documents prove Nova Helix was negligent. They can't silence us both." A tentative trust began to form between them, the scientist who had failed to prevent disaster and the mother fighting to protect her extraordinary daughter. Their unlikely alliance, built on shared responsibility and growing respect, might be Valentina's best protection against those who would exploit or silence her. "Tomorrow," Eleanor said with newfound determination, "we fight back." The sleek black car pulled up outside Alejandra Ruiz's apartment building 3 days after Valentina's Senate testimony. 2 men in expensive suits emerged, their polished shoes clicking against the cracked sidewalk. They represented Nexus Dynamics, a startup that had been watching the Nova Helix disaster unfold with calculated interest. "Your daughter has extraordinary talent," the taller man told Alejandra as they sat in the cramped living room. "We're prepared to offer her a consulting position, 6 figures, flexible hours, and her name on patents." Valentina sat quietly on the worn sofa, her dark eyes studying the visitors. She noticed how they barely glanced at her mother, directing their pitch to a 10-year-old as if she were an adult. The younger executive slid a tablet across the coffee table, displaying a contract with numbers that made Alejandra's breath catch. "We're developing an AI system similar to Nova Helix's, but safer," he explained. "With your intuition for system vulnerabilities, we could revolutionize the market." That night, after the men left, Valentina found her mother staring at their business card. "We could pay off our debts," Alejandra whispered. "Maybe even move somewhere without cockroaches." The girl placed her small hand over her mother's. "They don't want me to make things better," she said. "They just want to be first." More offers followed. A venture capitalist invited them to dinner at a restaurant where the menu had no prices. A tech magazine wanted exclusive rights to Valentina's story. A rival CEO offered to fund her education through college if she would publicly endorse their products. Each proposal came wrapped in flattery and promises, but Valentina recognized the hollow center of these opportunities. They wanted to own her story, her talent, her future, not nurture it. "Abuela always says when someone offers you the world, check what they're taking from heaven," Valentina told Eleanor Chase during one of their secret meetings at a local park. The ethicist nodded. "They see you as useful now, but what happens when you disagree with them?" One evening, Valentina found a package outside their door, a custom laptop with specifications beyond anything commercially available. The note simply read, "For the girl who sees what others miss." No strings attached, but the implied debt hung in the air. Alejandra watched her daughter examine the device without opening it. The values she had instilled, honor, humility, truth, weren't just words, but armor against a world that would commodify even a child's conscience. "What should we do with it?" Alejandra asked. Valentina looked up, her expression resolute beyond her years. "Return it." "We can't be bought, Mama. Not even with kindness." The sleek conference room at Nova Helix Industries felt colder than usual as Alejandra Ruiz sat across from 3 stern-faced attorneys. The legal team had arranged stacks of documents with precision, the company logo gleaming on each page. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Palo Alto continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the battle unfolding within these glass walls. "All we need is your signature," said the lead attorney, sliding a thick non-disclosure agreement toward her. "Sign this, and we can all move forward. Your employment will continue uninterrupted." Alejandra glanced at the document, understanding exactly what they wanted. Her silence about Valentina's warning before the catastrophic launch. They were asking her to deny her daughter's truth, to pretend the child never spoke up. "And if I don't sign?" she asked quietly. The attorney's smile tightened. "Then Nova Helix would have to reconsider your position with the company. Additionally," he paused, "we understand your visa situation is complicated." The threat hung in the air. Alejandra felt her heart pound against her ribs. Her immigration status had always been a delicate matter, but to have it weaponized against her was something else entirely. That evening, Alejandra returned to their modest apartment, where Valentina waited anxiously. The mother sat beside her daughter on their worn sofa, taking her small hands. "They fired me," she said simply. "I wouldn't sign their papers." Valentina's eyes widened. "Because of me? Because of what I said?" "No, mi vida. Because of what I didn't say. I wouldn't lie about you." The following days brought a cascade of hardships. Their rent was due in 2 weeks. The refrigerator emptied faster than Alejandra could fill it. Job applications went unanswered as word spread through Silicon Valley's tight-knit corporate community. Hiring Alejandra Ruiz meant inviting Nova Helix's wrath. One evening, a formal letter arrived bearing government seals. Immigration authorities requested Alejandra attend a special review of her status. The timing was no coincidence. "We could just go," Valentina suggested, watching her mother stare at the letter. "Move somewhere else. Start over." Alejandra looked at her daughter, this extraordinary child who had stood up to one of the most powerful men in technology. She thought about the values she had worked so hard to instill: honor, truth, integrity. "No," she said firmly, "so we stay. We fight." That night, mother and daughter sat at their kitchen table, planning their resistance. Their resources were limited, but their resolve was not. The corporate giant had billions, but the Ruiz women had something money couldn't buy. They had each other, and they had the truth. The soft glow of a computer screen illuminated Valentina Ruiz's face as her fingers danced across the keyboard. It was well past midnight, but sleep eluded her. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the aging device and her mother's soft breathing from the next room. Valentina had been thinking about the simulator for days, a forgotten piece of Nova Helix technology she had secretly helped optimize during those afternoons when Alejandra brought her to work. The young girl had shown such natural talent that one of the junior developers had let her tinker with the code, never imagining the 10-year-old would understand it, much less improve it. Access granted flashed across her screen. The simulator, designed to test the neural interface in controlled environments, had been abandoned after the catastrophic launch, its servers neglected in the chaos that followed. What she found made her blood run cold. Hidden deep within the code was an exploit, a backdoor that would have allowed the AI to override user consent protocols. Had the neural interface gone fully operational, it could have accessed user thoughts without permission, harvesting data directly from human minds. They knew, she whispered to herself, discovering timestamps that proved Nova Helix executives had been warned about the vulnerability. Garrett Voss had seen the reports and buried them, prioritizing the launch date over safety. For 3 hours, Valentina meticulously documented everything. She took screenshots, recorded code sequences, and compiled a comprehensive report that even adults with engineering degrees would find impressive. The girl worked with methodical precision, her dark curls falling across her face as she hunched over the keyboard. When Alejandra found her daughter asleep at the computer the next morning, she didn't immediately wake her. Instead, she scanned the open document on screen, her eyes widening with each paragraph. The janitor had picked up enough technical knowledge over the years to understand the gravity of what Valentina had uncovered. "Mija," she whispered, gently rousing her daughter. "What have you found?" Over breakfast, Valentina explained everything. The exploit wasn't just dangerous. It was intentional. The AI had been designed to gather data without consent, a violation of privacy on an unprecedented scale. "We need to share this," Alejandra said, her protective instincts warring with her sense of justice. Valentina nodded, her young face solemn with responsibility. "I know." Within days, the report began circulating among tech journalists and ethical hackers. Though anonymous at first, Valentina's distinctive analytical style was recognizable to those who had witnessed her Senate testimony. Her technical prowess and unflinching honesty started attracting attention from those seeking truth in a landscape of corporate deception. The secret simulator had revealed not just a technical flaw, but a moral one, and Valentina had exposed both. The annual Palo Alto Tech Expo buzzed with activity, its halls filled with the usual parade of sleek devices and polished presentations. Valentina Ruiz stood nervously backstage, her dark curls tied back with her favorite ribbon as she peered through the curtain at the packed auditorium. She hadn't expected to be here, but Marissa Chen, CEO of Quantum Dynamics and longtime rival of Nova Helix, had personally invited her. "Ready?" Marissa asked, placing a reassuring hand on Valentina's shoulder. The 10-year-old nodded, clutching her tablet with white knuckles. When Marissa introduced her, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Many recognized the girl from the viral video, but skepticism was evident on their faces. What could a child possibly know about advanced neural interfaces? "This is Valentina Ruiz," Marissa announced, "who I believe deserves 15 minutes of your undivided attention." The young girl approached the microphone, her small frame dwarfed by the massive stage. For a moment she froze, spotting several former Nova Helix executives in the front row. Then she caught sight of her mother, Alejandra, standing at the back of the hall, giving her an encouraging nod. "The AI assistant wasn't just buggy," Valentina began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "It was fundamentally flawed in its architecture." Using simplified diagrams on the main screen, she methodically walked the audience through the shortcuts Nova Helix had taken. She explained how the neural interface bypassed critical safety protocols, how testing phases had been abbreviated, and how warning signs had been systematically ignored. "When I said don't touch that button, I wasn't guessing," she explained. "I recognized the pattern failures in the system display, the same patterns I'd seen crash the beta version 3 months earlier." The room fell silent as Valentina demonstrated a small simulation she'd built, showing exactly how the cascade failure had occurred. Tech journalists frantically took notes while industry veterans exchanged concerned glances. By the time she finished, the initial skepticism had transformed into rapt attention. Her final words resonated throughout the hall. Technology should serve humanity, not endanger it for profit. The applause began slowly, then swelled to fill the auditorium. Within hours, clips of her presentation flooded social media platforms, accompanied by hashtags like #ValentinaWasRight and #EthicalTechNow. That evening, as Alejandra and her daughter rode the bus home, the janitor hugged Valentina close. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. Valentina stared out the window, watching the gleaming tech campuses pass by. She hadn't wanted this spotlight, but if her voice could prevent another disaster, perhaps it was worth the discomfort. Unknown to her, she had just become the reluctant face of a growing movement demanding ethical accountability in technology development. The stock market ticker flashed red as Nova Helix Industries shares plummeted for the 5th consecutive day. What had begun as a ripple after Valentina Ruiz's Tech Expo revelation had transformed into a financial tsunami. Institutional investors, once eager to pour millions into Garrett Voss's vision, now couldn't distance themselves quickly enough from the company. Inside the once bustling headquarters, the silence was deafening. Half-empty coffee cups sat abandoned on desks where engineers had received termination notices. The pristine glass corridors that had graced the covers of innovation magazines now echoed with the footsteps of legal representatives and auditors, rather than brilliant minds collaborating on the next breakthrough. "We're looking at complete liquidation within 90 days, whispered a board member to another as they hurried past the AI development lab where it had all begun. The neural interface devices, once heralded as humanity's next evolutionary step, sat in locked cabinets, classified as potential evidence in the mounting lawsuits. Garrett paced in his corner office, tie loosened and hair disheveled. The CEO's smartphone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters he no longer answered. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see news vans camped at the perimeter of the campus. The same media that had once celebrated him as a visionary now painted him as the villain in endless news cycles. "Sir, the SEC investigators are here again," his assistant announced, her voice tinged with resignation. She had already updated her resume. Throughout Silicon Valley, the Nova Helix implosion became the cautionary tale shared in hushed tones at investor meetings and startup incubators. Venture capitalists scrutinized ethics policies with newfound intensity. Companies rushed to establish child advisory boards in a transparent attempt to demonstrate they were listening to the next generation. The most damning blow came when the Department of Defense publicly terminated their classified contracts with Nova Helix, confirming Valentina's revelation about the military applications of the AI. Congressional hearings were scheduled, subpoenas issued, and former employees lined up to testify about the corners cut in the race to launch. In Palo Alto coffee shops, tech workers debated whether Garrett had known about the flaws or merely ignored them. Either way, his reputation was in tatters. His billion-dollar empire, built over 8 years of sleepless nights and ruthless ambition, had crumbled in less than 2 weeks. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment across town, Alejandra watched the news coverage with mixed emotions. Justice was being served, but she took no pleasure in the hundreds of rank-and-file employees now searching for jobs. Her daughter had never wanted destruction, only truth. Eleanor Chase paced her modest home office, surrounded by printed code and half-empty coffee mugs. The weight of her revelation pressed on her mind as she waited for Alejandra and Valentina to arrive. When the doorbell rang, she took a deep breath before opening it. "I need to show you something," Eleanor said, leading mother and daughter to her desk. She pulled out an old personnel file. "Alejandra, you worked at Quantum Nexus before Nova Helix, didn't you? In the janitorial department?" Alejandra nodded, confusion crossing her face. "For 2 years, yes. But how did you—" "I was lead developer there," Eleanor explained, her voice soft with disbelief. "There was a critical error in our security protocol that mysteriously got fixed overnight. Management called it a miracle." She looked directly at Valentina. "It was you, wasn't it? Using your mother's access card after hours?" The 10-year-old's eyes widened. Then she nodded slowly. "The pattern was wrong. I could see it when I walked past the screens." Alejandra gasped. "Valentina, you never told me." "I was 7, the girl said simply. "I didn't want you to get in trouble." Eleanor shook her head in amazement. "You saved us from a catastrophic breach, and I've been trying to figure out who my anonymous savior was for 3 years." This revelation transformed their tentative alliance into something deeper, a connection forged through time and shared purpose. As they talked into the evening, Valentina grew unusually quiet, scrolling through an old database on Eleanor's computer. "Dr. Chase," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "Did you know a programmer named Miguel Ruiz?" The ethicist froze. "Yes, brilliant mind. He disappeared after flagging critical flaws in a military AI project." She paused, the pieces suddenly connecting. "Valentina? Was he—" "My father," the girl whispered, her fingers tracing the screen where his employee photo appeared. "Mom always said he had to go away for work. But he never came back." Alejandra moved to her daughter's side, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to protect you from the truth. He exposed dangerous shortcuts, just like you did. Then he vanished. The authorities said he fled to avoid prosecution, but I never believed it." Valentina stood straighter, her father's eyes looking back at her from the screen. "He did what was right, even when it was hard." Her voice grew stronger. "Just like we're doing now." Eleanor watched as determination replaced shock on the young girl's face. This wasn't just about Nova Helix anymore. It was about continuing a legacy of courage that ran in Valentina's blood. "We need to finish what he started," Valentina said, turning to both women with newfound resolve. "No more secrets, no more shortcuts." The classified files Dr. Eleanor Chase had shared contained something far more alarming than Valentina Ruiz had initially realized. Late one night, as she pored over the technical specifications, the 10-year-old's eyes widened. The neural interface AI assistant wasn't just designed for homes and personal use. It had been engineered with military applications in mind. "Mom, look at this," Valentina whispered, pointing to a buried line of code. Alejandra leaned over her daughter's shoulder, squinting at the screen. The documentation revealed a covert partnership between Nova Helix Industries and the Department of Defense. The AI that had gone rogue wasn't just compromising personal data. It had been scheduled to integrate with missile defense systems within 6 months of its consumer launch. What the public perceived as an embarrassing corporate failure was actually a narrowly averted national security catastrophe. "This is why they're so desperate to silence us," Alejandra said, her voice barely audible. The threat of deportation suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't just about protecting corporate reputation. Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor was meeting with former board members who had jumped ship after the collapse. What they revealed painted a damning picture of Garrett Voss's leadership. The CEO had personally altered test results, presenting perfect simulations to investors while bearing catastrophic failures in the system's neural core. "He showed us a 99% success rate," explained one former executive, sliding a thumb drive across the table. "These are the actual results. The system never achieved better than 62% stability." The evidence was irrefutable. Garrett had forged documentation, pressured engineers to sign off on incomplete safety protocols, and deliberately misled the board about the AI's readiness. When presented with warnings about potential cascading failures, he had reportedly said, "We'll fix it in the update." The following morning, Eleanor delivered these findings to Valentina and her mother. Their modest apartment, now cluttered with salvaged computer parts from their community tech hub, fell silent as they reviewed the evidence. "He knew," Valentina said finally. "He knew, and he pushed the button anyway." The implications were staggering. Had the launch been fully successful, an unstable AI would have eventually gained access to critical defense infrastructure. The system collapse that had seemed like a corporate embarrassment had actually prevented something far worse. As news of the military connection leaked to select journalists, public opinion shifted dramatically. What had been viewed as a cautionary tale of tech hubris was now recognized as something far more sinister, a deliberate deception that had placed not just consumer privacy but national security at risk. The depth of Nova Helix's deception became impossible to ignore, and with each new revelation, Garrett's desperate attempts to maintain control only accelerated his downfall. The price of truth was steep for Valentina Ruiz. Where once she could blend into the background of her school hallways, she now found herself the subject of whispers and stares. Classmates who had never noticed her suddenly wanted to be her friend, while others kept their distance as if fame were contagious. News vans occasionally parked outside their apartment complex, reporters hoping to catch a glimpse of the girl who had brought down a tech giant. "They called again," Alejandra said one evening, placing her phone on the kitchen counter with a sigh. "The immigration office wants to review our case." The timing wasn't coincidental. Since losing her position at Nova Helix, Alejandra had been piecing together work, cleaning houses, taking on night shifts at a local diner. Anything to keep a roof over their heads. The threat of deportation hung over them like a storm cloud. a convenient tool to silence their voices. "Is it because of me?" Valentina asked, looking up from her notebook where she'd been, sketching circuit designs. Her mother crossed the small kitchen and wrapped her arms around her daughter's shoulders. "No, mi vida. It's because we stood up for what's right, and I would do it again." Their apartment had shrunk since Alejandra's termination. They'd moved to a smaller unit in the same building, giving up the second bedroom for a studio that smelled perpetually of the Indian restaurant downstairs. Yet in this compressed space, their bond had only strengthened. Saturday mornings now meant helping neighbors with technical problems, fixing phones, recovering lost photos, explaining privacy settings. Valentina's knowledge flowed freely to those who needed it most, not those who could pay the most. Sundays remained sacred. The day they traveled across town to Abuela Carmen's house, the small home with its peeling paint and flourishing garden became their sanctuary. There, surrounded by the smells of cilantro and lime, they could momentarily forget the chaos they'd unleashed. "My granddaughter, the hero," Abuela would say, pinching Valentina's cheek before pressing a plate of food into her hands. When the community learned of their financial struggles, tamale fundraisers materialized in church parking lots. Former co-workers from Nova Helix, the cleaning staff, security guards, and cafeteria workers showed up with grocery bags and gift cards slipped discreetly into Alejandra's hands. "We believe you," they would whisper. "Both of you." At night, when the apartment grew quiet, Valentina would sometimes crawl into bed beside her mother, the way she had as a much younger child. "Are you sorry we did it?" she asked once, her voice small in the darkness. Alejandra stroked her daughter's hair, the dark curls now cut shorter for practicality. "Never," she answered. "Some things cost more than money, but they're worth infinitely more too." The modest two-bedroom apartment on the east side of Palo Alto had undergone a remarkable transformation. Where a dining table once stood, salvaged computer monitors now formed a semicircle. Discarded motherboards and processors, rescued from dumpsters behind tech companies, had been carefully refurbished and given new life under Valentina Ruiz's skilled hands. "Try connecting the blue wire to that port instead," Valentina suggested to Miguel, a 7-year-old from the building next door, who clutched a half-assembled robot with determined focus. The girl's patient guidance was a stark contrast to the chaos that had surrounded her name just months earlier. 3 afternoons a week, the Ruiz apartment buzzed with the energy of a dozen neighborhood children. They came with curiosity and left with knowledge, carrying recycled tech components and new skills back to their homes. What began as an informal gathering had evolved into a structured program that parents now called the Button Club, a name that made Valentina smile despite herself. Alejandra watched from the kitchen as she prepared snacks, her engineering textbooks stacked neatly on the counter. After losing her janitorial position at Nova Helix, she had enrolled in night classes at the community college. The transition hadn't been easy. The family lived on savings and community support, but seeing her daughter flourish as a teacher gave her strength. "Mom, Carlos figured out the circuit problem," Valentina called excitedly, gesturing toward a beaming 10-year-old whose LED project had finally illuminated. The mother nodded proudly, remembering how different their lives had been just months ago. The threat of deportation had faded after public support rallied behind them, but financial stability remained elusive. Yet somehow this cramped apartment filled with second-hand technology felt more meaningful than the gleaming corridors of Nova Helix ever had. On Thursdays, Alejandra led her own workshop, teaching parents basic computer skills and resume building. Her growing confidence as an instructor surprised even herself. Technology isn't just for engineers with fancy degrees, she often told her adult students. It belongs to anyone willing to learn. The community tech hub operated on principles opposite to those that had doomed Garrett Voss's empire. Transparency, collaboration, and ethical consideration came before speed or profit. Each project began with a simple question that had become their unofficial motto. Should we touch this button? As the afternoon session wound down, Valentina helped a young girl pack up her first coding project. The child's eyes shone with the same spark that Eleanor Chase had once noticed in Valentina herself. In this modest space, surrounded by discarded technology given new purpose, something powerful was taking root, a vision of innovation, guided not by market forces, but by the hands of the community it served. Dr. Eleanor Chase stood before the flashing cameras, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. After 15 years in the tech industry, she was crossing a line from which there was no return. The documents I'm releasing today prove that Nova Helix knew about critical flaws in the neural interface system, Eleanor announced to the packed press room. These weren't simple bugs. They were fundamental design failures that put users at risk. The former lead AI ethicist had spent 3 sleepless nights organizing the classified files that validated everything Valentina had claimed. Internal memos, failed test results, and executive communications now scrolled across screens worldwide. The scientist had chosen truth over career, conscience over comfort. Back at their apartment-turned-tech hub, Alejandra watched the press conference with tears in her eyes. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered to her daughter, squeezing Valentina's hand. The girl nodded silently, understanding the weight of Eleanor's sacrifice. Meanwhile, across town, Lucky Trent was orchestrating a very different kind of plan. The investor had built his fortune by identifying and controlling promising talent, and he'd never seen potential like Valentina's. His legal team had quietly filed paperwork seeking temporary guardianship, citing Alejandra's unstable employment situation and inability to nurture her daughter's exceptional gifts. "The child needs proper guidance," Trent explained to his board of directors. "Under my care, her innovations could be properly developed and monetized." What he didn't mention was the clause in his guardianship petition that would grant him ownership of any intellectual property Valentina created. The scheme might have worked if not for a junior clerk at the courthouse who recognized Valentina's name from the viral video. Within hours, the documents were leaked to a tech journalist who had been following the Nova Helix story. When confronted outside his downtown office, Trent dismissed the allegations as mischaracterized philanthropy. But his carefully crafted image crumbled when recordings surfaced of him discussing Valentina as the golden goose with potential investors. The exposure of Trent's manipulation sent another shockwave through Silicon Valley. 3 more investors pulled their remaining stakes from Nova Helix's shell, and former board members scrambled to distance themselves from both companies. That evening, as community members gathered in the Ruiz apartment for the weekly coding workshop, Eleanor arrived with a small potted cactus, a housewarming gift for their growing tech hub. "I thought you might appreciate something that thrives despite harsh conditions," she said with a tired smile. Valentina placed the plant by the window. "Like whistleblowers," she replied, wisdom beyond her years shining in her eyes. Valentina Ruiz sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by printouts of code she had painstakingly recovered from Nova Helix's servers. Her dark eyes widened as she scrolled through the data. What she found made her stomach drop. "Mom!" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were watching me!" Alejandra rushed to her daughter's side, confusion etched across her face as Valentina explained. Nova Helix had been collecting data from her personal computer for months before the launch. Every keystroke, every search query, every hesitation, all harvested without consent to train their neural interface. The company had identified her as an exceptional outlier in their early testing phase and had been monitoring her ever since. "They used me," the young girl whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The betrayal cut deeper than any previous revelation. This wasn't just about corporate greed or technological hubris. This was personal. They had violated her privacy, her trust, her sanctuary. Eleanor arrived at their apartment that evening with more recovered files. The ethicist's face was pale as she confirmed Valentina's discovery. "There's something else," Eleanor said, placing a tablet on the kitchen table. "Something about the system failure that doesn't make sense." As they reviewed the crash logs together, a pattern emerged that left them speechless. The catastrophic cascade failure that brought down Nova Helix's AI wasn't random. It followed a specific sequence, one that matched a recursive failsafe algorithm. "This code signature," Eleanor pointed, her finger trembling slightly. "It's not part of our original architecture." Valentina stared at the screen, recognition dawning on her face. "That's because I wrote it." The room fell silent. 8 months earlier, Alejandra had brought her daughter to work during a school holiday. While waiting for her mother to finish cleaning, Valentina had been invited by a junior programmer to try an early beta version of the system. Sensing something fundamentally unstable in the design, she had quietly embedded a breaker line, a failsafe that would activate only if the system threatened to exceed ethical boundaries. "I forgot about it," she admitted. "I never thought they would actually use that version in the final product." The irony was staggering. Garrett Voss's billion-dollar empire hadn't been toppled by random chance or even by Valentina's warning that day. It had been undone by her own foresight months earlier, a hidden safeguard planted by a 9-year-old girl who understood the technology better than its creators. Alejandra wrapped her arms around her daughter, pride and concern mingling in her embrace. "Your intuition protected everyone," she whispered. Valentina nodded slowly, her mistrust of those in power now cemented by this final revelation. 6 months after the Nova Helix collapse, Valentina Ruiz stood in her living room, now transformed into what the neighborhood kids called the coding nest. Multicolored wires snaked across tables made from repurposed shipping pallets, while salvaged monitors flickered with lines of code. The modest apartment that she and her mother called home had become something extraordinary, a place where technology served community rather than corporate interests. "Ms. Ruiz, I fixed it." A 7-year-old boy held up a refurbished tablet, beaming with pride. Alejandra looked up from where she was helping 3 girls debug a simple game and gave him a thumbs up. The offers had come pouring in after the Senate hearings. Book deals worth millions, speaking tours across Europe, even a Netflix documentary series. Tech giants had sent representatives with blank checks, eager to harness Valentina's intuitive genius. Lucky Trent had made one final desperate attempt, offering to establish a foundation in her name with a $20 million endowment. They had declined them all. "We have everything we need right here," Alejandra had told her daughter one night as they sat on their small balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky over Palo Alto. The former janitor was now 3 months into her engineering program at the community college, her textbooks stacked neatly beside their dinner table. The contrast couldn't be more striking. While the gleaming Nova Helix headquarters stood empty, its glass walls reflecting nothing but abandonment, their humble apartment buzzed with life, creativity, and purpose. Children from the neighborhood, many from families who cleaned the very offices of tech billionaires, were learning to code, build, and, most importantly, to question. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Valentina slipped quietly into the back row of the East Palo Alto Science Fair. She pulled her baseball cap lower, though few people recognized her without the media spotlight. On stage, 11-year-old Marisol Garcia was presenting her project, an accessibility device based on Valentina's open-source designs that would help her grandmother, who had limited mobility, used everyday technology. "I wanted to make something that helps people, not just something cool," Marisol explained to the judges. "Technology should work for everyone, not just the people who can afford it." Valentina felt her eyes grow warm with tears. She didn't need fame or fortune. Seeing her ideas take root in young minds who would carry them forward with conscience and care, was success redefined. As she slipped out before the awards were announced, the young girl caught a glimpse of her mother waiting outside. Alejandra smiled knowingly. They had chosen a different path, not of collapse, but of building something sustainable, one curious mind at a time. 1 year after the Nova Helix collapse, Valentina Ruiz stood beside her mother in their apartment living room, now transformed into a bustling community tech center. Children from across Palo Alto gathered around recycled computers, their faces illuminated by screens as Alejandra guided them through basic coding principles. The modest space had become a sanctuary where technology served people, not profit margins. "Remember," Valentina told a young boy struggling with his project, "the most important question isn't if you can build something, but if you should." The 10-year-old's wisdom had deepened through experience. Her dark curls now cut shorter for practicality, rather than tied with ribbons. Alejandra watched her daughter with quiet pride. The janitorial uniform had been replaced by casual clothes befitting a community educator and part-time engineering student. Their journey had cost them security, privacy, and nearly their home, but had given them something far more valuable: purpose. That morning, the Ruiz family had declined their 4th interview request from a major network. Fame held no appeal for them anymore. Their work spoke louder than any televised special could. 3 tech companies had offered Valentina consulting positions with 6-figure salaries, all politely refused. "We're not anti-technology," Alejandra explained to visitors who sometimes misunderstood their mission. "We're pro-humanity." The community had rallied around them when deportation threats loomed. Neighbors organized legal support, local businesses contributed to their tech center, and even Dr. Eleanor Chase regularly volunteered her expertise. The former ethicist had found redemption in mentoring the next generation alongside the very people who had exposed her company's failings. Meanwhile, across town, the abandoned Nova Helix headquarters stood as a monument to unchecked ambition. Garrett Voss had retreated from public view after the congressional hearings, his reputation in tatters. The cautionary tale of his company's implosion was now taught in business ethics courses nationwide. What began as a single warning, "Don't touch that button," had evolved into a movement. Valentina and Alejandra had shown that ethical innovation wasn't just possible, but essential. Their approach valued transparency over secrecy, collaboration over competition, and human welfare over quarterly profits. "The future isn't something we predict," Valentina told a reporter who managed to catch her after a community workshop. "It's something we protect, one decision at a time." As evening fell over Palo Alto, mother and daughter closed their makeshift classroom. Beyond their windows, the lights of Silicon Valley glittered with possibility. The world was listening now, not because they had shouted the loudest, but because they had stood their ground when it mattered most. In the age of artificial intelligence, they had become guardians of something irreplaceably human: conscience.